The intensifying competition between the US and China had significant implications for China's economy. Michael, how do you assess the impact of this competition on China's economy? What are the key areas affected, and what are the implications for China's economic growth prospect?
So the impact of US-China tensions on China's economy so far has actually been quite limited. China's economy has a lot of problems right now. Most of them fall, what I would say, under two categories. One is just the natural consequences of China's development up to this point, that it's no longer a low cost, high growth, high return economy. The development gap that it had has largely been filled, and it was never expected to grow at high rates indefinitely. But then the other, I think, main factor here is the CCP's own policies. Since Xi Jinping has come to power, growth has gradually declined, and that's not a side effect of Xi's policies. I would say they actually are one of the points of Xi's policies is the policies in the past 10 years or so have been directed at mitigating risks as a higher priority than growth just for growth's sake. And so, if China really wants to get its growth back at higher levels and it wants to prioritize that, then there's a lot more it can do with its own policies. It's not being affected as much by the US-China tensions. A US-China trade is actually still quite strong. Bilateral trade hit new records last year. But US-China tensions are affecting areas that China cares about more than they care about economic growth. So it is affecting China's ability to acquire sensitive technologies and to develop its own indigenous technologies. So these are the areas where US-China tensions are really starting to bite China. But as far as the economy goes, yes, they're helping to exacerbate some of the problems China's already having, but these problems are more internal to China than they are related to the geopolitics.
What is your take? The situation across between the US and China will have some impact on Taiwan. What Taiwan can do in terms of dealing with the escalated tension between US and China? What's your take?
This is one of the biggest challenges that Taiwan's leadership has to, well, really the biggest challenge Taiwan's leadership has to face. The US doesn't quite understand the complexity and the many facets of Taiwan's relationship with China. So the US only sees the security threat, the threat to Taiwan's sovereignty. Taiwan sees China as both a political and security threat and as an economic lifeline. So it's very much dependent on China, on its trade with China. This dependence on trade with China affects Taiwan's stance towards China, but even more, Taiwan's stance towards China is affected by the security concerns. Taiwan has been dealing with these for decades, understands better than really anyone in Washington or anyone anywhere in the world outside of Beijing the risk associated with dancing too close to China's red lines on Taiwan. Previously, the US very much appreciated Taiwan's cautious approach towards relations with China, whereas now I think that's still appreciated in policy circles, but at the same time, I think there are more people who are maybe a bit newer to this issue, who are advising policymakers and really want to see Taiwan take a much harder stance towards China. Now, this is something that it's just going to make it more difficult for Taiwan to thread the needle to navigate this. Taiwan is essentially stuck in between, in the middle of the US-China competition. It has to manage tensions and also manage its economic relations with China, while at the same time ensuring that it doesn't end up getting gobbled up by China.
So there's a concern, in Taiwan because of the trade relations with China. So a lot of people in Taiwan or our audience in Taiwan really want to know whether the U.S. will lend a hand on Taiwan and provide the market, grant the market access through the so-called like free trade agreement or any kind of trade deal. But at the same time, we also know the U.S. American audience also concerned about the free trade or globalization may hurt American interests. What is your take on this issue? Whether the U.S. will grant Taiwan market access because we like to try, or we try to help Taiwan get rid of the dependence. What is the major issues or concern or obstacles to have Taiwan on Americans, the opening market list?
Yeah, that's a really good question. This whole issue of a US-Taiwan free trade agreement has been around for as long as I can remember, and it hasn't happened before, and there are reasons for that. Now, I would say also, and as you pointed out, Dennis, the sentiment in the US towards free trade agreements is quite negative right now, but the sentiment towards Taiwan has never been better. And so I would say if we were talking about a multilateral free trade agreement with many different countries, I would say the chance of that is essentially zero right now. But if we're talking a free trade agreement between the US and Taiwan, well, I think the political will is either there or quite close to being there. Now, I think it'll take time. There are many issues that would need to be ironed out. But after all, at least in my opinion, free trade agreements tend to be driven more by politics and political concerns than by economic and trade concerns. And from that perspective, there is a lot of interest on the US side in helping Taiwan in this way.